Okay, I think we should get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 5th Heart Mind Live webinar, Creative Practices to Spark Connection and Well-Being. I am Fiona Douglas-Crampton, and I am very fortunate to be the President and CEO of the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. I think we can all use some connection and well-being right now going into the summer, and our hope is that this webinar and the amazing presenters that we've brought together for you today will send you forth into the summer with a sense of positive hopefulness and renewal. So glad that you're all here. Before we get started, I do want to take a bit of a pause. And Adrian, perhaps if you could bring up the next slide. Of course, we always want to take a moment to show gratitude and respect and acknowledgement that we live and work and care for our families on the traditional and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations peoples. I know some of you may be joining from other places and lands of other peoples, but I wanted us, in light of all of the painful discoveries and things that have happened in the First Nations community recently, to just give us a moment to reflect on the land that we're on and to sit in this space with gratitude and respect and very much compassion for our First Nations peoples, especially in this week of National Indigenous Peoples Day. So if we could just take a quick moment and be silent for a moment, that would be lovely. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, just I'm going to be very brief before we start because I want to give the most time possible to our amazing speakers today. I wanted to just set the stage for how the agenda will roll out and using the Q&A and the chat feature. So the Q&A, we want to just keep that especially for questions that are for the panelists. You can put in questions or upvote questions for the panelists. If possible, please address them to a particular person. That'll make it easier, but if it's a general question, that's okay too. But that's the place to put your questions for the panelists that we'll have at the end. The chat feature you can use for just sharing general comments, or if you're tuning in from somewhere far away, or if you want to ask questions of our team, the DLC team, or you need some technical help. That's where you can do that. And of course, we are going to have a recording of this webinar available for everyone. It'll be emailed to you within 24 hours of the end of the event. And very, very important piece of housekeeping, we will have a survey at the end. And my job is to impress upon you how incredibly important the survey is to us. It not only gives us incredible, valuable information about how we can improve and make things better, or if we're on the right track, but it also helps us get funding. We actually need evaluations and these kinds of results for many of our funders. So it's a huge help to us if you can fill out a survey. That would be wonderful. So that's it for housekeeping. And we will move right along. So the way today will flow is our first speaker will be Dr. Kristin Neff, and then Andrea Menard, and then Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. At the end, they will each have their presentations back to back, and then we will have about hopefully 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to spend most of my time handing it over to them. And we now begin with Dr. Kristin Neff. She is the Associate Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Texas, Austin. She is well known for her work in self-compassion, and she has authored many, many articles and books, including Fierce Self-Compassion, How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive. So I will hand it over to you without further ado, Dr. Kristin Neff.
Thank you, Fiona. Happy to be here. Yeah, and I've been reading about what's happened up in Canada with First Nations people, and it just made me, think all of us, it's been a really tough time, some people more than others, but heading out of this pandemic, hopefully it's been tough. I'm fortunate that my life's work, really, my research and what I do is to teach a resilience tool that can help us cope in really difficult moments like we've all been through. And that's self-compassion. So that's what I do. If you were to ask my son, sometimes my son introduces me to people as the self-compassion lady. So I'm the self-compassion lady. I didn't invent the idea of self-compassion. I actually learned about self-compassion about 30 years ago. It was my last year of graduate school at University of California at Berkeley, and I was under a lot of stress. It was a difficult time. I had just gotten a divorce. I was feeling a lot of self-doubt. And I'd heard that mindfulness meditation was good for stress. So I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And luckily for me, the woman leading my meditation group, the very first night I went to go learn meditation, she talked about the importance of self-compassion. It was a Buddhist group, so I wasn't surprised that she was talking about compassion. I knew that, Buddhists were into compassion, but it never even really struck me. Self-compassion, what, you can have compassion for yourself? This is something that you can do intentionally, and is it good for you? Right? I was kind of surprised by it, but I tried it out. I tried being more intentionally warm and supportive and understanding toward myself, especially all the stress I was under and what had happened with my divorce. And I was just blown away by the almost immediate difference it had in my ability to cope and get through. It was so amazingly helpful. As I helped myself, it helped. Surprise, surprise, right? And so I eventually got a job at University of Texas, where I'm at now. And I decided I wanted to do research on self-compassion. So even though it's really an ancient idea and many people had talked about it, no one had really done any empirical research on the benefits of self-compassion, or if in fact there were any. So that's what I did. I developed a model of self-compassion and created a scale to measure it. And so what I want to do now is just give you a little overview of the theory of self-compassion, a little bit of the research on it. But most importantly, I actually want to teach you a very simple self-compassion practice that you can start using today, right? And for the rest of your life. Self-compassion isn't rocket science. It's actually very simple. It's simply a matter of intentionally doing a U-turn and giving yourself the compassion, understanding, and support that you would more naturally give to others. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so according to my model of self-compassion, there are actually 3 different elements of self-compassion that all need to be there. It's like a stable 3-legged stool, and we need all 3 elements to make it a healthy mindset. So that's kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And let me take you through them one by one. So mindfulness is actually at the core of self-compassion. Right. So everyone, hopefully these days, everyone knows about mindfulness. It's really entered our common culture, and certainly at the Dalai Lama Center, you'll be familiar with it. So mindfulness is simply a way of opening to what's happening in the present moment. Now, sometimes when what's happening in the present moment is painful or makes us feel shame or causes difficult emotions to arise, we don't want to be present with what is. We either want to fight it or we want to stick our head in the sand and pretend it's not there. But in order to have compassion for ourselves, in order to support ourselves in times of struggle, right? And by the way, the word compassion in the Latin, passion means suffer, com means with. So in order to be with ourselves when we're struggling or suffering, we need mindfulness first. We need to be able to acknowledge, this is really hard. I'm feeling really bad. This is painful. This is scary, whatever it is. Otherwise, it'd be like if a friend who called you up and said, hey, I really need to talk. Can you help me out? And you're like, I'm too busy, or I'm focused on something else, or I can't be bothered. right? You wouldn't do that to be a good friend, and yet we do that to ourselves. We often either we ignore our pain and our difficulty, we just kind of soldier on, or what the other thing we do is I call it over-identification. We get lost in the struggle. We get carried away with the storyline of either how awful we are or how awful our life is. And there's no perspective that we need to be able to step outside of ourselves and say, hey, you're having a hard time. Can I help? So we need that equilibrium and perspective and awareness that mindfulness offers, aimed toward our pain or difficulty, in order to really start giving ourselves compassion. And then, once we're aware that we're struggling, especially when our struggle comes from feeling like we failed or we feel inadequate in some way, we need to have a kind, compassionate response. I mean, some people, they may be aware of the pain, but they may judge themselves for it as a way of kind of trying to control what's going on. Maybe if I beat myself up, I won't make mistakes anymore and I'll be a better person, right? Which actually doesn't really work. And we'll talk about that. So in order for it to be a compassionate response, the idea is we're kind, we're warm, we're supportive, and really importantly, at the heart of compassion, whether it's for others or for ourselves, is the motivation to alleviate suffering. In fact, we know with fMRI research that when people are in a state of compassion for self or others, the part of the brain linked to a motor response gets activated. There's this sense of wanting to help in some way. And so when we have self-compassion, we're aware that we're struggling, and there's the desire to help ourselves in some way. And then finally, really importantly, what makes it compassion, self-compassion, and not self-pity is this sense of connectedness to other people. I call it a sense of common humanity. In other words, instead of thinking it's just me who's failed or it's just me who's struggling, we remember that everyone's imperfect and everyone leads an imperfect life. And of course, we know this logically, rationally, that everyone's imperfect and everyone struggles. But what happens emotionally, especially when we fail or something happens, is our immediate reaction is something has gone wrong. This isn't supposed to be happening, as if what's supposed to be happening is perfection. And if perfection is not happening, something has gone wrong. And more than that, something is wrong with me. And so what happens is we start to feel isolated in our struggles as opposed to feeling connected to others. And this adds insult to injury because, not only are we hurting, we feel all alone as we do so. So this is really the wisdom element of self-compassion, when we remember that we're actually all part of a larger interdependent whole. We aren't alone, right? Now, having said that, it's not to say all lives matter, or we do acknowledge that some people suffer more than others. Absolutely. People who are oppressed, for instance, suffer more than people who aren't oppressed. So it recognizes differences in the amount and the type of suffering. But what it does is it reminds us that every single human being is worthy of a compassionate response. We don't dehumanize anyone, including ourselves. Right. So my latest work has been focused on differentiating what I like to call the fierce and the tender side of self-compassion. There are really two faces to this loving mindset. So one way of expressing self-compassion is in its tender form. This is the warm, more soft, nurturing aspect of self-compassion that allows us just to be with ourselves as we are. It's a source of unconditional acceptance and worth, and that really allows us to heal. It's like, a parent toward their crying child. That baby may be screaming its head off, but as a parent, you just love that child anyway. You rock that child, you cradle that child. Eventually, the child starts to calm down. Well, we can actually do that with ourselves. We accept the fact that we're imperfect, that we fail, and that our life's imperfect. We hold that with love. And eventually we start to heal and calm down. But in order to alleviate our suffering, although we need to accept ourselves, we don't necessarily want to accept all our behaviors or all the situations we find ourselves in. Sometimes our behaviors or the situations we're in actually cause suffering. And so therefore the compassionate response is to do something about it. And this is what I call fierce self-compassion. This is the more powerful action-oriented side of compassion, which might mean protecting ourselves, standing up, saying no, drawing boundaries. This is a really important aspect of self-compassion. For instance, I see the Me Too movement as a collective arising of women's fierce self-compassion as we say, no, it's not okay. We aren't going to stand for it anymore. That's an act of self-compassion. Also providing for our needs, especially women. We're so socialized to always say yes to others, to be agreeable, to always meet other people's needs. But when we forget about our own needs, or when we subordinate our own needs to those of others, we aren't being self-compassionate. So part of this fierce standing up for ourselves means, not that I'm more important than you are, but I'm as important as others, and I'm going to try to have a compromise to meet everyone's needs. And then finally, motivating change. It's really important. Self-compassion does not mean being complacent. Again, if you're engaged in behaviors or situations that are harming you, the compassionate thing to do is to try something different. And as we'll talk about in a moment, self-compassion is an effective source of motivation. So when we bring this fierceness and tenderness together, it's like yin and yang, right? They become balanced and integrated, and they create a type of caring force, which is really needed not only to change ourselves, but I think to change the world around us. If we're too tender without enough fierceness, we may become complacent. And look at the world around us. We can't be complacent. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be changed urgently. At the same time, if we're just fierce without tenderness, if we're just all about driving and striving, we may become hostile and aggressive and forget to have our hearts open. So it's the balance between the two that are so important. And if you're wondering why my new book is aimed at women, it's because gender role socialization, it doesn't allow men to be tender, and it doesn't allow women to be fierce. And that harms everyone. So the book is particularly aimed at women to help them reclaim their fierce side. Oh, and by the way, I realized I probably forgot to mention this picture of the bear. You're probably wondering, why did you have a picture of a bear? Because I like to call this our fierce mama bear energy. I mean, you want to see something ferocious, you try attacking that mama bear's cubs. And by the way, I think men and women, everyone has that internal mama bear. So again, we're used to using that toward others, just like the tender side. But the trick with self-compassion is we make a U-turn and we use these two energies to help ourselves. Okay, so just very briefly, and what does some of the research on self-compassion show? Well, there's almost 4,000 studies on self-compassion. It's amazing. I actually published the first study on self-compassion back in 2003, and first, it was like me and my graduate students, and then other researchers started coming on board, and now it's an entire field of study. And so what it shows is very clearly self-compassion is powerfully linked to well-being. So the way we do research, either you can take the self-compassion scale I developed and see if you have higher or lower scores and how that's linked to well-being. But also we do experimental studies. For instance, what happens if you help people be self-compassionate about a struggle they have, or you train them over time, how does that change their well-being? And what we know is that it changes it very much for the better. So self-compassion is linked to reductions in negative mind states, things like depression, anxiety, stress, suicidal ideation, a lot of really harmful states of mind. Again, that's the healing power of self-compassion. It reduces negative mind states. At the same time, even though it's directly aimed at suffering, self-compassion feels good. Right? It feels good to feel connected to others. It feels good not to be alone. It feels good to have this sense of loving kindness toward yourself. And so self-compassion is also linked to positive states of mind, things like happiness, life satisfaction, hope, and gratitude. So it's a very powerful source of emotional and mental well-being, which is so important now, especially after COVID. People are struggling so much, trying just to survive mentally. Self-compassion, and there's research on this actually that shows that people who are more self-compassionate were able to get through COVID more intact. There's also a fair amount of research that distinguishes self-compassion from self-esteem. So self-esteem is a positive judgment of self-worth and evaluation. Self-compassion is like unconditional self-worth, whether you fail or succeed. And so what we know is self-compassion is linked to fewer social comparisons. You don't need to be better than others to be self-compassionate, right? You just have to be flawed like everyone else. I can do that. It's not linked to narcissism the way self-esteem is. And most importantly, it's not contingent. So self-esteem is a fair weather friend. It's there for you when you succeed, but what happens when you fail? Self-compassion is always there for you, and it provides a much more stable sense of worth. Research also debunks some of the common myths about self-compassion that actually stand in the way of people's ability, or maybe I should say not so much their ability, but their willingness to give themselves permission to be self-compassionate. So one is the belief that it's weak. And that's partly because people only think of the tender side of self-compassion and not the fierce side. So what we know from the research is when you're in a really tough situation, like for instance, there's a lot of research with combat soldiers, people who go into tough situation like a war zone, the more supportive they are to themselves, the more they're an inner ally inside their head as opposed to an inner enemy, the better they come through it. So for instance, soldiers develop less PTSD. They're less likely to turn to drugs and alcohol as a way of dealing with their pain. Or as some people, sadly, may even contemplate suicide as a way to deal with their pain. So self-compassion is a way of coping with pain. It's a source of emotion regulation that makes you much stronger. It doesn't make you weak at all, quite the opposite. Another fear is that it's selfish, right? As if we only have like 5 units of compassion, and if I give 3 to me, I'm only going to have 2 left for someone else. It doesn't work that way. So what the research shows is the more you resource yourself, the more you have available to give to others. So people have better relationships, and they're also less likely to burn out in caregiving roles. And then also people fear that it's self-indulgent, that self-compassion is just giving pleasure to yourself. It's not, because self-indulgence means short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term harm. If you care about yourself, you're going to do what it takes to be healthy and well, eat well, exercise more, etc. But the number one block to self-compassion is the belief that it's going to undermine our motivation. We really think we have to be harshly self-critical in order to get anything done. What we know from the research is self-compassion is a more effective motivator than self-criticism. So first of all, you still want to achieve your goals if you're self-compassionate, but you don't do it because you're afraid of being inadequate unless you achieve your goals. You do it because you care and you want to achieve your goals. And that creates a sense of safety, which lets you know that I'm going to try my best, but if I fail, that's okay. It's part of being human to fail. And what that means is people are more able to learn from their failure, which is so key. They're less likely to become afraid of failure or to procrastinate or, stop taking risks. So people who are self-compassionate are better able to deal with failure, which means they're able to maintain their motivation even when they hit bumps along the way. Also, some people are afraid self-compassion means blowing off responsibility. Just the opposite. When it's okay to make mistakes, it makes it easier to own up for your mistakes, and people are more motivated to try to repair any harm they've done. And so, can self-compassion be taught? Like I said, I've done a lot of research on self-compassion, but this is really what interests me now, is how do we help people be more self-compassionate? And there are a lot of practices we've developed to teach people this skill. So along with my colleague, Chris Germer, we've developed something called the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, which has, I think, like 30 different exercises. It has meditations, but also a lot of practices we can use in daily life in order to build the skill of self-compassion. Again, it's not really difficult. We just need to get in this new habit to remember to do it. And so it's taught all over the world, except Antarctica. The other 6 continents we're in. We've got thousands of teachers worldwide. A lot of empirical support for the program exists. And now what we're doing is we're adapting the program for people in particular with particular types of suffering, like teenagers or parents or couples or healthcare workers, educators, and actually athletes we're working with now. And it's really exciting because, again, self-compassion isn't just a good idea, it's something we can actually do. And so what I want to do in our last remaining time together is actually want to teach you a little self-compassion practice. So you can, again, try it out for yourself and see how it may impact something you're struggling with. And so what I'm going to teach you is something called the self-compassion break. So just to give you a little preview of what it's going to entail, it's almost like baking a recipe for bread. You know, we need one part mindfulness, one part remembering common humanity, and one part kindness. And then when we bring them all together, we call it a self-compassion break, because the idea is you bring in these three components in your daily life in the moment where you're struggling or feeling badly about yourself. You intentionally call in these three components, and it helps reframe the situation in a very supportive manner. And then you'll also note that part of this practice, we use physical touch to help convey compassion. And some of you are like, this is kind of touchy-feely. And yes, it is touchy-feely on purpose. Just to say, self-compassion also operates at the level of physiology. The primary way parents convey care to their infants and children is through touch. And so what we know is that if we give ourselves some kind, supportive touch, it actually works to alter our nervous system reaction, so our body calms down and we feel supported. There's a lot of, again, empirical support for this. So if you have that reaction, it's a little touchy-feely, just think, that's right. It's empirically shown to change my physiology. And, you know, see if you can notice how it does change your physiology. Okay, so what we're going to, again, the practice is designed to be used in life when stuff comes up. But right now, we're going to have to call the situation to mind purposefully, since we're in this workshop context. So I'd invite you to close your eyes. I'm going to close my eyes so we can turn inward. Okay, and just settle into your body. We've just been talking a lot. Maybe just feel your feet on the floor. Feel the weight of your body on the chair. Just relax a little bit. Come back to your own presence. All right, so I'd invite you to think of a real situation in your life right now that's causing some stress or some struggle. So this may be something that you're feeling bad about personally. Maybe you've made some mistake, or feeling inadequate in some way, or you failed at something. Or it may be something, you know, just in life. Maybe you're feeling still really down about the pandemic, you're feeling lonely, or maybe you've lost someone that you love. Or maybe you're having work issues or relationship issues. Please, I would like you to choose one thing to work with, but try to keep in mind, don't choose anything that's overwhelmingly difficult now, because if you feel overwhelmed, you actually aren't going to be able to learn the practice. So something that's challenging, but nothing that upsets you so much that you won't be able to focus. Just take a moment and think of what that situation might be. Just really play it out in your mind, you know, what's happening. What is it that's difficult or that you're feeling badly about? Okay, so I'm going to bring in the three components of self-compassion. I'm going to invite you to really apply them to this difficult situation. So first, we want to bring in some mindfulness. So I'd invite you to become aware of how difficult the situation is. Really just turn toward it. Maybe say to yourself something like, this is really hard. Or, this is a moment of suffering. Maybe big suffering, it may be little suffering, but nonetheless it hurts. So again, maybe you want to use some language with yourself internally, just really kind of validate the difficulty of the situation and be clear that it's here. This is hard. Don't have to argue about whether or not it's justified. It's here. Can we just open to that, open to the pain? And then we also want to remind ourselves of the humanity of this situation, right? It may feel like you're alone, but situations like this is part of being a human being. There are many, many other people feeling something similar. So please use language that really addresses that sense of connectedness. It may be something like, there's nothing wrong with me for experiencing this. Part of being a human being. Or maybe this is just part of living a human life. Maybe something like just me too, I'm not alone. And then finally, we want to bring in the kindness. So one way we're going to do that is with touch, like I said. So try some sort of supportive, caring touch, maybe both hands over your heart, right? Or maybe cradling your face, right? Or just holding yourself in some way. See if you can use some sort of touch to really convey, just like you might to a child, to really convey your own presence and the fact that you care. Feeling the warmth of your hands on your body. And then try saying some words of warmth, kindness, support, which are just what you need to hear. Maybe they're more words of tenderness and acceptance, something like, it's okay to make mistakes. Or, I'm here for you. It's going to be okay. Or maybe they're more fierce words like, I want you to speak up for yourself, or you need to make a change to be happy. Some words of encouragement. Again, I've got your back. You just ask yourself, what do you need to hear right now to support yourself? And if you're stuck, you could always try imagining what you might say to a dear friend who is in a similar situation. And just try it on with yourself. Okay, and so letting the practice go and opening your eyes. And just before we move on to the other presenters, I would just like to say that people have different reactions to exercises like this. Sometimes it can be quite activating. We open our hearts and it's like Pandora's box and a lot of old stuff comes up. And if that's the case, just really try to take care of yourself. Let's try grounding your feet to the floor, getting up, having a cup of tea, do whatever you need to feel stabilized. So in other words, we need to practice self-compassion in a way that's self-compassionate. Okay.
Thank you so much, Kristin. That was that was amazing. I think the practical application was really, really helpful for people. I love the busting myths and talking about two types of compassion. There was some really amazing stuff that I learned in there. So I would like to now close off with Kristin, and we're going to go to our next presenter. And thank you, Andrea Menard. So Andrea, we are so happy to have with us today. She is an award-winning Métis songwriter, singer, actress. She just won a National Award, Actor Award for Woman of the Year, and she is dedicated to empowering Indigenous voice through her songs, her stories, activism, training, and healing. And her TEDx talk, Silent No More, has a lot of views. I'm actually going to make sure that I see that soon. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Andrea.
Hello, Intanchi Kiawao. My name is Andrea Menard, but I'm also known in my traditional names in Anishinaabe, which is Firewoman Shkotekwe, and in my Cree traditional name, which is Notagoyutin, which is Grandmother Wind. So I would just like to land after that beautiful talk by Kristin. Thank you so much. We have, this message this knowledge we're talking about and wanting to share today for all of you who have been caretakers and deep holders of life, and we honor you for that work. I might need to give you a little bit of the context of what I'm going to be sharing today, because as Kristin said, she talked about that imperial knowledge, and the self-compassion that she speaks about came from the East, and she brought it to the imperial world. And so as an Indigenous woman, I also come from outside that imperial world, and I probably need a little context for you, because there's a long history of that knowledge, of Indigenous knowledge, just not being able to be seen, because when you have the imperial lens, it's just hard to see through it or past it. So I'm going to tell you a story to help us get there. All right. It was 1997. Wait, I just want to start this little timer, you know me. It's 1997, and two of my Indigenous friends are out in ceremony, fasting on the land. One of them is a Cree man in fasting in the bush in Treaty 6 territory, and another, my Anishinaabe friend, is an elder who is fasting on the plains in Treaty 1 territory. Now, both of these men are out in nature, and they are, for 4 days and 4 nights, they are sitting in stillness in just one little spot on the earth. And for 4 days and 4 nights, they're going without food. And for 4 days and for 4 nights, they're singing and praying, and they're giving up their comforts so they can connect to that fierce and tender compassion that Kristin said. They're giving up their comfort so that they can connect to their inner wisdom, and hear their ancestors talk to them. So the men sit, and when the time comes, they are both gifted with a message. Now, it's 1997. It's funny how you don't see me out there fasting on the land. I'm not talking about me being out there on the land. It was 1997. I was too busy chasing my dreams. I wanted to be a singer and an actor, famous Indigenous Métis woman. I didn't want to be in ceremony. It was the last thing on my mind. But I also know that it was no accident, no coincidence that I ran into both of these friends of mine within 2 weeks of them coming off their fast, and that both of them, because it doesn't always happen this way, both of them wanted to share their message with me. And their message, although interpreted differently, was exactly the same. My Cree friend put it like this. He said, "The 2,000-year reign of man is ending, and that we are now entering the time of woman." My Anishinaabe friend said it like this. How did he put it? The life givers must take their role in the circle because they will be leading this next era. Wow. So I was truly honored to receive these messages and shocked by the similarity of them, because two different parts of the country, two different men, same message. Now, to be truthful, I was honored, but I didn't really get it. I'm like, sure, I'm a woman, I'm a life giver, but what did that mean? And why were my friends looking at me like now I was the keeper of this message? I'm like, no pressure. What was it supposed to mean? Well, what was I supposed to do about it, right? Well, I'll tell you what I did about it. I put it on the back burner for 15 years. I just went, until 2012. I heard the message again. And when I did, this time I started to get it. And it was at an elders gathering. Hang on. It was at an elders gathering. And my all these elders from all across Turtle Island were coming together to share knowledge and swap stories. And they wanted to come. They had a message for the world, and what they said was, well, they said many amazing things, but what their main message, one of the things that they came to do was send a message to the outside world about Indigenous knowledge, about Indigenous people, our worldview. And of course, they said many amazing things, but the one thing that made my head explode was this message. Let's see if I can share my screen with you. Hopefully that works. Can you guys see that? Was now is the time of the rise of the sacred feminine. That's what they said. And it was like a gong went off my head, because this was the same message I had received years ago, 15 years ago. But now it was a little different. It was what, like Kristin said, is that the rise of the sacred feminine wasn't just about women or about Indigenous women. It was about all human beings. So now is the time of the rise of the sacred feminine. And that is really, really important, because as she said, it's like fierce and tender. That is, every single person has compassion, this fierce and tender compassion within them. But maybe one has been a little more practiced. Imperial knowledge has been a little more practiced. That's our masculine nature, our doing, our active, our determined, our drive. That's that part of ourselves. But the other part, which is the nurturing, which is the tender, which is the emotional part of us, those parts have been left outside of the circle. And so now is the time of the rise of the sacred feminine. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is moving into that area, into the Indigenous lens. Is that so? The rise of the sacred feminine, I'm coming from an Indigenous lens, but for this has roots in your own personal history too. This is not an Indigenous concept. It is a human concept, but it's very, very prevalent in the Indigenous community. We are all about ceremony and prayer and recognizing our interconnectedness with all of life. And so to me, I would like to share that knowledge today. Some 3 simple little steps that we can take in order to connect with the parts of us that have been undeveloped, the parts of our lives that have not been as honored as the other parts. And the other parts, the drive, the doing, and all of that stuff, we are good at it. We're very good at it, but we're also exhausted, in the middle of a pandemic, and we're all exhausted. How did that happen? And the reason why we're exhausted is because we've been trained to do. And that is driving us into the crisis that we're in. So many crises that our families and our world are experiencing. So it's time to do something new. And as Kristin said, self-compassion is in that sacred feminine, that part of it. Because the way I see it is that all of the things that have been left out of the circle, all of the things that have been um, devalued in our society are needing now to come home into our hearts. And the circle is a sacred hoop that we can say every single part of us, every single part of life belongs on that hoop, on that medicine wheel. And that includes you. So for the first thing we're going to talk about today is something that is, again, so simple that it can be overlooked, but imperial knowledge tends to overlook these things. So I just would like to really hear it from a wisdom-based place. Very simple. Can you guys see this, by the way? I'm hoping.
Andrea, could you just make it full screen?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, it's not full screen for everybody. So
let's see if I can find that. Maybe not. Hey,
maybe
okay,
the slideshow.
Okay, let me stop the slide and then I'll try again over here. Okay, so I probably clicked the wrong one. Here we go. I think this is the one you need to see, right?
Yeah,
you see it now?
perfect.
Okay.
Yes,
Is that the one
perfect,
you see?
thanks.
Thanks for
Yay.
the heads up.
Yay.
Okay, so it's going to nature. Very, very simple, but incredibly important from an Indigenous lens is that this nature is where our healing takes place, is where our wisdom and our learning takes place. Everything that we want to know about life is out there for us to see. And when we go into nature and we connect with Mother Earth, take our shoes off and connect. We've heard of earthing and grounding, but the fact is that here we are on Zoom. Here we are here, and I'm sure all of you have been on Zoom. You have been caring for people in the most extraordinary circumstances. And, you know, a lot of us are just zoomed right out. Well, when we go to nature, it's like the electromagnetic. This is the electro world, and the Mother Earth is the magnetic world. That is the place where our cells relax, our hearts slow, our ears listen to natural things. Because the sound of the birds, for instance, the song of the birds, or the appearance of animals, the appearance of plants, the smell of nature, those things are all healing to our physical bodies. And tell me you don't need a little self-care, right? Self-compassion. Here is another one. Go into nature where the idea, the actual embodiment of compassion lives. Mother Earth gives to us and never ever lets us go. So we want to be held, if we want to be loved, if we want to be nurtured, then we go to our mother for that. The mother who gives and gives and gives. It's a great, great remembrance. So go into nature. Very simple, but so important. As this picture says, it's like diving into the water, letting the earth's water, it didn't come through a tap. Ooh, actually feel the salt or the fresh water on your body. Let your skin be touched by the natural living things, because the Indigenous world, we see that everything is alive. And in that empirical way of looking at the world, nothing is alive. And that is such a detriment. That is hard. That means that we're alone in this world. We're alone with our thoughts. We're alone with our structures. And that is not the truth. Those structures are squares, they're man-made, but the circle holds everything within it. Everything is welcome in a circle. And that is a kinder, more nurturing, loving place to be. So go into nature and just move into the sound of natural things. Incredible thing to do. And simple. Okay, and there we go. The next thing, again, is so simple, but it's entering into the stillness. All of us have just been running and running and running. We have set up our lives, or the structure or the systems have set up our lives, and we've just obediently got right into line, is chasing our happiness out there, chasing our money to survive, chasing friends, chasing relationships, running to get our to-do list done, right? Running after kids and sports, and well, a little quieter during the pandemic, but you know, and tracing doctor's appointments and for our elders. We have been running ourselves ragged. And sometimes we actually just run for the sake of running because we don't know what else to do. So here is the next little message for you, is to stop running and enter the stillness. What is so scary in the stillness that we'll do anything to avoid it? We're like, yeah, I got nothing to do. We grab our phone, we do something, we do anything to get that motion going, because that motion inside, that doing, is so habitual, and it doesn't serve us. It's actually just running from our feelings. It's running from time limits, deadlines, all the things that are valid, right? Our masculine system, we're good. Our masculine side is great at this stuff, but our feminine side, all human beings, not female. This is not female and male. This is our feminine side, our quiet, nurturing self part, the one who wants to go in and do ceremony or be in the land. That part of us is suffering greatly. That's the one who's responding badly to the stress. And the stress is as though it's a part of life. It doesn't have to be a part of life. That is not how we need to be living our lives. So I'm going to help us do a little stillness. Now, all of us have a heartbeat. All of us have a heartbeat. And if we're listening, if we're in that feminine frame of mind, which is we're in a receiving mode, because there's active, where we are doing something, and then there's receiving, which is feminine. And again, we all have these, male or female. So this is nobody being left out of the circle here. This is language that I want everyone to honor their feminine part, because there is a rising of that valuing of the feminine. And that means valuing of women, the valuing of Indigenous people, the value of people with disabilities or extra abilities, of people of color, Black community, the voice of Mother Earth, nurturing men, all the emotional expression, all of these things are needing to rise. That's the rise of the sacred feminine. So you're wondering why all these voices are being heard. Maybe for the first time you're seeing is because it's the rise of the sacred feminine. So that means men and women and all my gender fluid friends, all of you, we're here to start nurturing that feminine part of yourself. So you have a heartbeat. Move into that receptive space where you can listen. Listening is receptive because you're allowing information to come into your two ears. As an elder says to me, you have one mouth and two ears. And that means you talk less and you listen more. So here we are. Put your hand on your heart and see if you can listen or feel your heartbeat. And this drum is the heartbeat of Mother Earth. So for just a few seconds, close your eyes and receive the sound of the drum, the sound of the heartbeat of life, the first sound you heard in the womb, because you all came here through a portal of the feminine. You received heartbeat knowledge, blood wisdom, ancestral love in that womb. So just remember, now you may not have a drum, but you have your heartbeat. And it will always remember where that first sound you heard. You will hear it, you will remember. So stop running. Sit in the stillness for a while. And the last one is express your feelings. To be creative. I'm an artist, but as my teachers and my elders have said, is that I am a creative person, but we are all creative beings. We are sparks of the Creator. We are children of the Creator and children of the earth, which means we have a sacred right to create. We have a sacred right to be here, to live our lives, to take up space, to have a voice. And of course, in the imperialistic, those systems, feelings are not really welcome. Feelings are considered weak, are like inconvenient, but ultimately they need to come home to the circle too. Because all of the stuff, that's what, the teachers of this time, I like to say I'm a translator for this COVID isolation time, is because a lot of us had to do that soul searching. A lot of people went inside for the first time. And so whatever I'm here for 20 minutes. We can't get into how to express your feelings, but I hope that you will honor them enough, as Kristin said, honor your feelings enough that you will take care of them. You will make space for them. You will go to therapy. You will make that call to a helpline or a group, but express them in a healthy way. That's part of the future. That's part of the rise of the sacred feminine. So in order to be creative, you let those feelings out. Let them howl. In my TED Talk, you'll see, in my TED Talk, I talk more about that. Now I'm running out of time here, so I just want to say the last thing, is about expressing your feelings. Sometimes it helps to set your voice free. So we're going to end with a little song that I want you to sing with me. Yep. It's a little song that just means thank you, I love you. Thank you, I love you. So please sing with me. I know I can't hear you, and I know maybe your husband or wife or children in the next room can hear you, but please sing along anyway. This is just thank you, I love you. Thank you very much. I'll stop my share.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was such a joyful way to end. That's fantastic. I love that. So I want to get moving right along and get to Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. Thank you so much, Andrea. I know we'll have some great questions afterwards. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Vanessa Lapointe, who is a registered psychologist, a parenting educator. She's a mom. She's a very accomplished speaker, and she speaks on topics related to parenting and well-being. She brings storytelling and humor and compassion into her speaking, and she is also the author of Parenting Right from the Start. So take it away, Vanessa.
Thank you, and good morning or good evening or good afternoon to all of you, wherever it is that you can. This is a magical kind of opportunity to get to connect with all of you and also everybody on this panel at this time in our history when so much has been happening. And it's a very curious thing that as we come up and out of the pandemic, what I am hearing from the voices all around me is that people are done and they are empty and they are tired and they're wanting to feel hopeful, and they're thinking they should be feeling hopeful, but instead they're feeling sort of at odds with things. And you know what they say, we only teach what we have to learn. And one of the things that I have learned in a very loud and resounding way over recent years is that we are creating our experience of our outer world from our inner world. And so if we want to have connection with our outer world, with our children, with our partners, with our colleagues, with our students, with our friends, if we want to have connection with the outer world, we actually have to arrive at connection from our inside world. In the absence of self being connected to self, and I'll explain that to you more in just a moment, we actually are going to struggle to offer compassion to the outside world. And if there's one thing that we all know the world needs right now, it's a good dose of. So we cannot pour from an empty cup. We have to sort out, how do we figure ourselves out? How do we fill ourselves up in order to be able to offer that forward to the world? Now, I had this experience about 7 years ago. I had just finished writing my first book. It went on, went through the whole editing process. I read it a zillion times, of course, during that process, got published. And then I came back to that book probably about 3 years after initially writing it and read my own book. And as I was reading the book, I had the experience of realizing, hang on a second. Those words are actually just me talking to me. It turns out that for me, my writing is actually an expression of my subconscious self through my conscious self. And so I'm able to bring those two things together. What was most fascinating in that realization is then I thought back to what was happening in my own life during the time that I was writing that book. And what was happening in my own life is things were feeling incredibly challenging. One could say that I was living through my own dark night of the soul. My marriage was in trouble. My children were at the effect of that and struggling. My son became very unwell and had to be pulled out of school on medical leave. And it felt like a lot. And I remember during that experience feeling incredibly disconnected. Like everywhere I went, I had to put on a different face and a different hat and do different kinds of things. There was not this experience of self as a whole. There was an experience of self as one who was partitioned, not connected to self. And I was exhausted with all of that. Eventually, that marriage did end. I was brought to my knees by the forces of the universe. And the only option I had at that point was to figure it out. What I landed on was that we are all the ages that we have ever been, which means that there is a 1-year-old version of me who still lives inside of me. There is a 2-year-old version, there's a 5-year-old version, there's a 11-year-old version, there's a 22-year-old version. She was awesome. And there's my present 46-year-old version. We are all the ages that we have ever been. And so in order to feel ourselves collectively whole, to be kind to all of those versions of self, to go back in time and heal what requires healing, fill ourselves up, grow ourselves so we can show up and grow our children and grow those who are depending on us for guidance and for leadership, we must serve self first. What is to the greatest good of self will be to the greatest good of all. And if I am not for self, then who will be? And so we have to go inside. We have to figure out how we do that. The way that I have mapped that through for myself is to do some inner child work. There's a book called Homecoming by somebody named John Bradshaw. And what I'd like to do now is go off course a little bit and take you through a meditation in order to have you experience what it is to be connected with self. For if the outside world is just a reflection or a mirror in terms of what is happening in the inner world, then we actually have to address that piece first in order to be able to take on, for those of you heading into summer break with your children and thinking, no, I don't have enough reserves on board to be able to manage that. To do that, we have to fill ourselves up. And a regular practice for me of that inner child kind of piece has made all the difference in terms of being able to step forward with swagger, being able to step forward filled up with that great mother kind of energy, and really have presence in the world in a way that adds to my own life and also adds to the lives of those around me. I will let you know before we begin this meditation that there, as Kristin had mentioned, you know, for some of you, this kind of a thing can be very intense and overwhelming. If you have a history of very significant and unresolved trauma, particularly from your childhood, you might want to just keep your eyes open and bear witness to the meditation. And I will leave it up to you to wisely decide how deep in you would like to go for yourself. So what I would invite you to do right now is just sit quietly and become aware of your surroundings. You're going to locate yourself in time and in space. You're going to feel your bottom and your back touching the chair that you are sitting in. You're going to feel your clothes on your body. You're going to hear as many different sounds as you can hear. You're going to feel the air in the room. And you're going to sit right now with the idea that just for now, there's no place you have to go and nothing that you have to do. You get to just be here now. If you haven't already, you can close your eyes now. Become aware of your breathing. Feel the air as it comes in and as it goes out. Be aware of how that feels in your nostrils as you breathe in and as you breathe out. If you have interrupting thoughts, that's okay. You can just notice them as if they were the sentences going across a TV screen during a program announcing the weather. The important thing is just to notice them and allow them to pass by. As you continue your breathing, you can hold on to your consciousness as much as you want, or you can let go in ways that allow you to relax. You learned to hold on and let go as a child, and you really know just exactly how much to hold on and how much to let go. You learned the perfect balance when you learned to breathe as an infant. You learned to breathe in and hold on long enough to fill all your blood cells with oxygen. And you learned to let go and feel the air go out. As an infant, you learned how to suck at your mother's nipple or at your bottle and let go as you tasted the warm milk. You soon learned how to hold on to your own bottle and let go when you had had enough. And you learned to hold on to the side of your crib and let go when you were ready to lie back down. So you really know exactly how much to hold on and how much to let go. You can trust yourself to find just exactly what you need for you. And now you can begin experiencing some childhood memories. Begin floating back in time. You can remember your first school days and your best friend in those days. You can remember a kind teacher or a neighbor. Drifting back further, now you can remember a house you lived in before you went to school. Was it an apartment? Did you live in the city? In the country? Now you can see some of the rooms in that house. Where did you spend your time in that house? Did you have a special room? Where was the dinner table? See who is at that dinner table. What did it feel like to be at that table? What did it feel like to live in that house? Now, imagine you could walk outside of that house and you could see a little toddler playing on the grass. It's you. Really look at this little you and get a feeling for who this child is. What color are your eyes? Your hair? What are you wearing? Talk to this child and say whatever it is you feel like saying. Now, let yourself float onto the grass and become the little child. What does it feel like to be this small child? Now look up at the grown-up you as the gentle wise one, your present day you. Sit in the wise one's lap if that feels safe, and hear the gentle wise one slowly tell you the following words. My little one, it's okay to be curious, to want to look and touch and taste things. I will make it safe for you to explore. I love you just the way you are, my little one, and I am here to take care of your needs. You do not have to take care of mine. It's okay for you to be taken care of, my little one. It's okay to say no. I'm so glad you want to be you. It's okay for both of us to be mad. We will work our problems out. It's okay to feel scared when you try new things and feel sad when things don't work out for you. I will not leave you, no matter what. You can be you and still count on my being there for you. I love watching you learn to walk and talk, to separate and grow up. I love and value you, my little one. If you feel like hugging the grown-up you, please do so. And as you hug the grown-up you, feel yourself become the grown-up you again. Hold your little toddler self. Make a commitment to love this carefree, exploring, curious part of you. Tell the child, I will never leave you. I will always be here for you. And be aware that you have just reclaimed your inner child self. Feel that sense of homecoming. Your inner child, the younger versions of you, are wanted and loved and never alone. Now walk away from that house, stroll up memory lane, walk past your first schoolyard, look at the playground and the swing, walk past your favorite old hangout as a young teenager, walk past a memory from 2 years ago. Feel yourself in the space you are in right now. Wiggle your toes. Feel the energy from the earth come up through your legs. Feel that energy in your chest as you take a deep breath. Feel the energy in your arms and your fingers, your shoulders, your neck, and your jaw. Stretch your arms. Feel your face. And be fully present, restored to your normal waking consciousness. You can open your eyes if you haven't already, and I would invite you to just take a look around in the room that you're in and let those eyes land on something other than your computer screen. So you are really inviting yourself back into the present day, where grown-up wise you actually knows intuitively and inherently how to collect the younger versions of you. John Bradshaw in Homecoming said, "It is never too late to have a good childhood." And it has been my experience as both a mother and also walking alongside families as a psychologist, that we tend to relive all of those parts of ourselves as we step into our caregiving roles of our own children and of others who are dependent upon us. So in order to feel those connections coming alive, to feel like you can move into and towards connection at this particular time in life, rather than retreating and feeling separate, I would really just invite you to honor the connection with self and see how that changes the way that you show up in the world. When we reflect back on what everybody has brought to the table today in terms of the different messages, it occurs to me that there are some very unifying threads. And those threads are, we are all connected. I mean, we are a social species. We are meant to live in contact and closeness and relationship with one another. Seeking the connection and figuring out resonant ways that that will work for us is integrally important in terms of our emotional health and well-being. And in all of that, we only have to show up in ways that are good enough. We don't need to be magical unicorn pictures of perfection. We get to feel, we get to emote, we get to be messy. Freud said that which stays in festers and comes forth later in uglier ways. So better out than in. Show up in the fullness of yourself. And you watch as you step into that authentic, resonant kind of energy, how that gets reflected back to you in terms of how others will be leaning into that connection with you. We are so close to the finish line, guys, with this pandemic. Keep your eyes forward. And it is my hope that we can all understand how the last 16 months have played out, not to us, but for us. Connection is where it's at.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was awesome. I love that thought that all of our ages are within us. So that's wonderful sentiment. So I'd like to invite everyone to come back on, because we do have a couple of questions, and we have only a few minutes for questions. I know we could probably go on for half an hour, but let's see, everybody, there you are. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question for Kristin. The question is, do you have any particular strategies for how to introduce and share self-compassion into the lives of our children or youth in our lives, or anyone else in our lives that might be helpful?
Yeah, so what we know is one way self-compassion is learned is through a process of modeling. So to the extent that you can model self-compassion out loud verbally, so for instance, next time you break the glass, think, aha, this is an opportunity to model self-compassion. So if you say out loud, oh man, oh, I love that glass. Oh, well, it's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. And then, just help yourself clean it up. Things like that. We know that that's a really important way people get those messages. Even if you're careful not to criticize your kids, if you criticize yourself, especially in front of your kids, they're going to get that message that this is a good way to be. Also, what we know, the way the brain works is we have mirror neurons that pick up at the pre-verbal level on the mental mind state of others. And so the more you're compassionate and warm and caring toward yourself, even when you don't say anything, your children will also be able to kind of resonate with those messages at the pre-verbal level. So really, when you're practicing self-compassion, you're helping your kids. And then just a final thing, what we find is the best way to give the message to children is through the metaphor of friendship. And by about age 7, most young kids are learning how to be a friend. And if at that time you just kind of slip in and remember to be a good friend to be yourself, or if your kid says something mean to themselves, would you say that to a friend? That also appears to be effective.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I think the modeling piece, that, you know, being unkind to ourselves in front of our kids is something that they're going to model with themselves, and we don't want them to treat themselves that way.
That's right.
So yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Kristin. Question for Andrea. I'm going to combine two similar questions that came up, asking to talk a bit more about how you set your voice free and find your creativity, other than obviously singing, because that was a great demonstration of how you do that through singing. Are other ways that you kind of set your voice free and express your creativity?
I would say, good questions, by the way, is that so much of our creativity is a natural expression of ourselves, but because of our training, we have these, you know, we have these blockages in our throat, we have these blockages in our mind about our abilities, but ultimately every single human being is a creative expression of creation, and we have that right. So for me, voice and sound is such an important, an emotional expression is so important, because it breaks through the blockage, you know, like just the sound of your own voice, the sound of your thoughts coming outside, the sound of your feelings is a creative expression. And of course, it's not seen or valued that way. But when you give yourself permission, it's almost like creativity needs your permission in our training. It doesn't need our permission at all. But in this world of that's good and that's bad, and this is good and that's bad, and keep your mouth quiet, and you know, all those things, we need to give ourselves permission. And so singing it sometimes opens up our throat and gets us to other feelings, not just listening to music that can do it, but we're talking about making the sounds themselves. There's, in the Eastern traditions, there's chant, there's what's the word I'm looking for, mantras, and then, you know, indigenous singing. So vibration helps. So anything that opens up helps you give permission. It says yes. You got to be saying yes to your feelings, just exactly what Kristin said, you know, and Vanessa, all those children, right? So if you give yourself permission, and each sound is a way of expressing your creativity, to being here, to being alive as part of the wheel of creation, then you can start to be creative in your life. But it does start, if you don't consider yourself a creative person, you have to move through these blockages first and say yes to making sound, to expressing your feelings, to honoring yourself enough to go, I am allowed to make sound. I'm allowed to sing my song like the birds and the wolves and the whales, right?
Yeah, finding ways to express. I think for a lot of people too, dance is a way to express their creativity if they're not comfortable with the voice, but moving their body. And I think those are great suggestions. Why not go out and sing and dance in the woods? And then we've combined everything.
Absolutely.
Everything that you said. Exactly. So that's great. Thank you so much, Andrea. I have a question for Vanessa. You know, I would, you know, these are great concepts, and would love to talk to you a little bit about how we can find some things that we can do for ourselves, and that we could do for others in our lives, whether they're partners or kids or others, to step into this summer feeling energized and open to this new phase post-pandemic, and re-engaging in a positive and hopeful way. So any strategies that you have for that would be really helpful.
Straight out of the gates, be very mindful about what it is that you are going to be rushing back into post-pandemic, and what it is that we maybe ought to think twice about rushing back into. Things that, you know, made us feel frazzled and busy. And the question to ask ourselves in all of that is this activity or this thing something that tops me up or taps me out? And if it's not a topper upper, then it's off the list. and that we can just be not against anyone else, but for ourselves, very full of swagger as far as honoring what serves us and serves our families. I would invite you, as part of some of the things that you take on in terms of specific activities, to think about being bored. Because it's in the silence and the quiet of boredom that we can hear our own selves. And pre-pandemic, we knew that mental health numbers were through the roof. We think now that the rate or prevalence of anxiety in children is roughly 1 in 3. And so it's not working. We need to back up the bus and begin to honor how it is that human beings are meant to go and grow, and finding stillness and quiet and boredom in all of that, so we can reconnect with our own selves from childhood forward, is really important. Play. It's a wonderful way for both grown-ups and children to experience joy, to connect with all of the inner ages within all of that, so that we can feel whole and feel grounded in our lives. And the final thing I would say is feel. We're meant to ride the wave. It's going to get messy, and then it's going to feel awesome. And feelings, especially those ones that we have been socialized to label as negative, we don't like them. I think it was Andrea that was like, no, we're trying not to feel. But feelings are meant to be like a ball falling towards the earth. And you need to hit the ground and get compression. The cry needs to be cried all the way. The anger needs to be felt all the way. When you get compression, the next thing that happens is bounce back. So if you want to have your happy, you have to also have your sad. We cannot know light without dark.
Thank you. Great way to end. That's all the time that we have for questions. And before we wrap up, I would just like to invite you one more time to please take a moment to complete our survey on today's presentation. Just think of it as your 1-minute volunteering for the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education by filling in this survey. That is really important. And could you pull up the slide for yes, there we go. And the other thing I'd love to do is to welcome you into our community, whether you want to join us through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or our newsletter. We would love to have you. And we have a very engaged community, so I'm really, I think you'll really enjoy being part of this. And we do put out new resources all the time on Heart Mind Online through our newsletter and through our social media. We'll also let you know when we're hosting another Heart Mind Live. So we would love to see you there. And we will, of course, share resources and the recording from the event today with all of you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll sign off now. Bye, everyone.